Yes. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Today is Palm Sunday. It's April 2nd, 2023. And our talk today is vulnerability, weakness or strength. And so we're going to begin with an opening prayer. And let's come together and by going inside and connecting and remembering that there is but one source of energy, of life, of power, of love, of life. One source. And it is the creator of all life, all energy, and it is also the creator of us, and it is in us. We are part of it. And so as we know this, we give thanks for knowing that the power, the love, the beauty, the joy of God is within us. And so we are safe. We are safe to explore ourselves as human beings with a great variety of emotions and love ourselves and know that we are safe in this universe. We give thanks for this knowing, for this understanding. We release, and together we say,
And so it
and
is.
so it is. So I have just got to start with Palm Sunday. It is
Okay.
Palm
Yeah.
Sunday, and our whole talk is not about that. But I have to think, as the story goes, as Jesus came into Jerusalem um, with his disciples, that he had to not know how he would be greeted because he did most of his work out of Jerusalem in where he was born and in the lake of Galilee. So he was in the Galilee region, and they went into the capital, Jerusalem, and he had to wonder how he would be greeted, and he did put himself onto a donkey, which is sometimes um, described as a very humble thing for him to do, but I think actually it was more to make him more visible because uh, not everybody had a donkey to ride on, and it was the Romans who rode horses, not the people from Judea. And so it made him more visible, but don't you know that made him feel vulnerable too, not knowing how he was going to be greeted. And instead, the stories had arrived in Jerusalem, and they knew of him and knew of the miracles that he had done. And so they got these palms from the palm trees and were singing Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, and praise be to you. And so he was really greeted very welcomingly and honor him. But he didn't know that. I don't think when well, maybe he knows everything. Who knew? But he did not. It was had to feel vulnerable
Right.
coming
And
into
that's the
the
way the
city,
story goes.
and that's the way it is. And I think he went right from there to the temple, where he then chased out the money changers. The money changers were there to make money for people who wanted to buy birds and things like that for sacrifices. They still believed then that they could please God and get forgiveness for their sins by burning offerings of animals. And if it was a really big occasion, it was a lamb that was sacrificed. But that's what the money changers were there for. And he just thought the whole thing was not appropriate and chased the money lenders out with a cat o' nine tails, a whip. That brought a lot of attention to him, again, making him very vulnerable, which is why the hierarchy of the Jewish community decided that he was a threat. So that's all I'm going to say about Palm Sunday, but we're talking about vulnerability and what it is and why it is, and if it's a good thing or a bad thing. So when we're vulnerable, we are feeling threatened, we're feeling in danger of losing something perhaps. It could be in danger of losing respect of someone, losing uh, a relationship, losing a position in government. And so we're actually going to be talking about vulnerability, just being in life, because it can be a dangerous place sometimes, and then vulnerability personally in relationships, and vulnerability spiritually. So, did you want to start with any of those, honey?
No. Why don't you read the quote, Ernest Holmes quote?
Ah, Ernest Holmes' quote
It's a good quote.
is actually a spiritual, having to do with spiritual vulnerability.
Yeah, I like it though.
For example, if you believe that that when you die you're going to go to heaven or hell and you don't know which, that's a pretty scary thing, and it makes you vulnerable your whole life. Makes you scared your whole life, and so this is what Ernest has to say about vulnerability. When we establish within our thought a non-resistance to that power which is greater than we are at the same time accepting within ourselves a stability that is the stability of the universe. We find ourselves secure, for we know that we're part of that which causes change, but is never affected by any of the changes. So we are a part of the prime mover, and of course we also know that no matter what, we survive all changes because our soul, our spirit is eternal, and part of the one that is. Another quote by Holmes in a book called Richer Living, he says, there's no fear in love, and there's no liberation from fear without love. Fear is based on the supposition that we are unprotected, rejected, friendless. If the fearful mind would entertain love and harmony and peace that go with it, it must turn from everything that denies this love, and trusting in divine guidance, open its being to the influx of love. Not just love of God, but love of everything, for love is all-inclusive.
Right. So Ernest Holmes' basic assumption here is that we are connected. We are connected to the divine. We are connected to and part of an aspect of, a dimension of God. And so, we say God in us, as us, works through us. That's very different than many people's ideas of themselves, which is I was born in sin. I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. And then so much of life after that is lived in trying to avoid having to deal with issues of that, trying to avoid being confronted with the weakness that is inherent, or the badness that one believes in themselves, and the lack of eternality, which is another frequent belief. And so at a spiritual level, what's really, really important for us is to have the willingness to be vulnerable, first off, with ourselves. When I say vulnerable with ourselves, I mean to take an honest look at yourself, and say, what is it I believe, and what is it I'm afraid of? And in fact, what Ernest Holmes says is not so different than we've read in other places too. I think in A Course in Miracles, there's only really two emotions, love and fear. And if it's not love, it's fear. If it's not fear, it's love. But the difference is that when fear is a driving force, we often don't know it's the driving force. We don't recognize it. We don't see it. So if you're living the good life in order to avoid bad things happening, you're not living the good life. You're living a fear-based life and hoping that it pays off at the end. If you're living a life in which you understand that you are a divine creation, that you are here on purpose with design and goodness built into you.
And you're valued.
Yeah, and that you haven't discovered all of it or haven't seen all of it doesn't mean it's not there. And so being vulnerable to an internal investigation, an internal looking and saying, let me look at myself honestly. And if there's an area where I feel weak or I feel vulnerable, what am I afraid of? What is the fear that's operating behind the scenes? Because so much today is of our lives are based on fear without recognizing it. And I've said this before, and it bears repeating. If I turn on the television, it's news about things to be afraid of. It's medications to help me prevent the things that I'm afraid of, or to help me not have those things take me out. It's a constant message that you have to dance ahead of the fear, and it's actually what's leading the dance. And what we're talking about is leading the dance with love and being open to that. I couldn't help but think about vulnerability when I go to the pool. when I go to the pool, no matter how many times I go to the pool, my skin feels very vulnerable for the first 10 seconds when I jump into water, because the temperature outside my body is adjusted to. I already know that when I get into the pool, after about 5 minutes, I'll be fine. But that transition from standing at the edge of the pool to actually getting comfortable in the pool, that period of time has been in some cases enough to say, I don't think I'll go to the pool today. And so when the fear of that transition is greater than the benefits, then we live in fear. And so we have to be willing, really willing to investigate our own nature and say, what is it I'm afraid of? And if I weren't afraid, what would I do? What could I do? If I weren't afraid that illness was going to take me out, if I weren't afraid that some fear wouldn't take me out, what would I do and how would I live my life? And would it be grand? And could it be? And last, before I turn it back over to you, is that because I'm an audiophile and I used to listen to old records, we used to have what's called a scratch filter. And you could turn the scratch filter on, and if you turn the scratch filter on, the scratches on the record wouldn't be so loud. The problem with that is that when you turn out the scratches, you also turn out all of the high-frequency sounds, the violin, the harp, all of the frequencies of music that you want to hear, they shut off as well. Mm-hmm. Why I'm sharing that with you is that when we have filters that stop us from being vulnerable,
from showing how we really feel,
yeah, or experiencing life because we're afraid, we also don't hear and see and feel
the beauty.
The beauty of it, yes. There have been times in my life when I wouldn't watch a movie because I knew the soundtrack would stir up so much emotion I didn't want to feel anything. And then there would be times when I thought, I really need this because I need to be able to turn on that awareness, to turn on that inner listening that says, yes, 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 this is wonderful. And it is, but we have to constantly, I think we have to constantly be aware of how easily we shut down, how easily, because we feel vulnerable and don't like that feeling, we pretend that we're not vulnerable and we shut down everything around us that would tell us that we have something to deal with, something to face.
Yes, and so I want to move now into the area of relationship. No, before I do, I want to talk more about life, living life. When we're wanting to elect a new president, our presidents who have been vulnerable enough to shed a tear when they're talking, when something makes them sad, have not been elected. When we want a strong president to lead our country, well, we don't want to see the vulnerability in that leader, and he usually doesn't get elected if he shows it. So there are times when it's really helpful. I think it's helpful in life most of the time, but not sometimes in politics and business when you want the leader to be strong. And so, but I'm moving on to relationships
but
now.
The distinction I would make in that is that it may not be safe to share how you feel. It needs to be safe for you to feel what you feel.
Yes,
And
because we can block that.
You decide who you're going to tell what your life about, or tell people about your life. You don't just do it at random, because some people will use what you share with them against you. Some people will be offended. Mm-hmm. So I think be discriminating in what you share, but not shut down the experience and the richness of it for yourself to experience. I welcome the president's tears, whether they be inside or outside. Mm-hmm. And I think most of us, if we are in a position of authority and have power, are going to have some tears. And most of the time, those tears will have to be shed silently.
Yeah, but I do appreciate the current president's
I do too.
Expression of feeling loss and sadness when we have these elementary school children killed by our guns. And I have to say guns used by people, of course. But nevertheless, I'd like to move into relationships now, because this is an area where vulnerability and sharing it lets you be known by the other family member. I'm thinking mostly spouses, and that this can be same-sex marriages or hetero marriages. It doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, a lot of women enjoy relationships with other women because they are naturally more real and vulnerable with each other. And so You know, you can't really love someone unless you know them. And in the olden days, when I was first married, which was, you know, a lot of years ago, the men were all strong, always strong, and they, or at least the men I knew, my father and my uncles and grandfather and all of them, and my first husband, they just thought they had to be strong all the time and never show any vulnerability. And that had to be a terrible burden to carry because it also doesn't let you be helped or aided by your spouse or the other members of the family. And it really keeps you from enjoying love and being loved. Because, and if you need any help in any area and you can't be vulnerable, nobody knows you need the help and you won't get it. But you also, you can't really have the love because you don't really know each other if you don't share vulnerability. And it takes courage because you don't know how the other person is going to react. If you share something, a weakness or a fear or hurt, that's what I'm talking about by sharing your vulnerability. And an expert in this area is Brene Brown. She's a PhD social worker. That means she not only does social work, she does research on people. And she came from a very strong-minded, strong-willed family where, you know, everybody's goal was to be strong, the brightest and best and all of that. And when you grow up with that, there's a big fear of showing anything else. And so she had quite a struggle in becoming what she calls real herself because of the way she was raised. So she says, I have a few quotes from her. Vulnerability is risk, plus uncertainty, plus emotional exposure. So in other words, you're letting your emotions be known, and you could be judged for that or even treated as less than. She also says, vulnerability is our most accurate way to measure courage. When we lose our capacity for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. It becomes scary to let ourselves feel it. So she said it can be scary to let yourself feel anything. You see what I mean? Because it might make you vulnerable. Vulnerability is hard and scary, and it feels dangerous. But it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives and having to ask ourselves, what if I would have shown up? What if I would have said, I love you? Show up, be seen, answer the call to courage, because you are worth it. You're worth being brave. So, as I say, in my very, very long 18-year relationship, there was a fear for my husband to be vulnerable to me or anybody else. And so he kept it all inside. That had to be a terrible burden for him, but it was also a terrible burden for me because I never really knew him or what was going on with him. I could guess, but I never knew. And I know it was a fear of sharing that. He felt like he had to be the strong one all the time. But see, the opposite of fear is love and joy. So you can't really even love what you don't know. You have to risk being exposed. And since Bob was a therapist and I was a new therapist when we met, the vulnerability of being totally truthful was easier for him. I think it had a lot of practice with it. And it was easy for me because that's the way my mother was. And so it just, and I was that way with my mother, so I had that experience of telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And it's a wonderful way to be in relationship because, and I find even with myself, because in many of my positions I've been the leader, and it's very easy as the leader, as I say, even like the leader of the country, to always be strong and healthy and have everything right in your life. And that's just not the case for anybody. I don't know any ministers who have that life. But we are often reluctant to share anything that can make us seem like we're not practicing this teaching or don't know how to use it or whatever. And actually, I think we're having this first gathering next Sunday, which we are for Easter. We're going to be having it in person in West Palm Beach because I actually expressed some vulnerability in a gathering of very spiritual women that I was having trouble finding a place that we could afford, and so, boom, there was an offering of a place that we could use quarterly, and I don't think that offer would have come if the person didn't know we wanted it and needed it. So, there is a payoff. There's a great payoff for risking being vulnerable, for risking being seen less
Well,
than.
and you, one of the things that's important is you felt safe with the women that you were with.
Yes, I did.
And
yeah.
you determined that you were safe. And when you are safe in a relationship and you have love in the relationship, then you can risk, it's not a risk, you can share more of yourself. And I was thinking how many people have been in a relationship and the spouse or the person they're in partnership with has said, we need to talk. And immediately, red flags go up, bags get packed, people are ready to go, got a full tank of gas, And if you're really in a loving, kind, and solid relationship, when that person says we need to talk, you say, oh, great, I love that. Let's do it. When? Because the fear that talking is going to bring an ending isn't there, and so we have to be willing.
I'm being vulnerable. I'll have to go get some water.
Oh my God, not that. Okay, now I can talk about her. Yeah. We have to be willing to be vulnerable in every area of our lives in order to be able to truly experience all of what life has to offer. For me, I think probably the times that have awakened me most to my own vulnerability have been times when I have been in the symphony hall, and the entire symphony has played a piece of music that I couldn't get away from. I wanted to go into, and the deeper I went into it, the richer and the more amazing and the more powerful my own life experience was. We need to look forward to those. If we can, we need to relish the opportunity to do those things if we can. Stepping out into the unknown and saying, I'm safe, I am enough. And I guess what I really want to share is the benefit of saying to yourself, I am enough for this situation. I am enough for all conditions that are around me. I am sufficient. I can do this. God in me, as me, working through me, can do this. And I think that's really, really, really key to our own ability to grow and to thrive. So this process of being vulnerable is just a real challenge. There's no doubt about it. And I see Judith coming back now, so.
Wow.
Vulnerable to a cough.
It certainly was. So I think it's about time to wrap up right now.
I think so, too.
Do you want to do the closing prayer?
Sure. Okay. Let's just collect our thoughts and ideas. Center ourselves in love. Center ourselves in the knowledge that the love that we have within us is a growing love, that it is powerful, that it is elegant, that it is far-reaching, that it is exactly all that we need for this life to unfold perfectly. So we say yes to love in all its forms. We say yes to love in every moment of our day, of all of our lives. We say thank you for this love, knowing that the love that is in us, that is around us, and that is everywhere present, is expressing through us, is all we need to know. And it is a healing love. So whatever's broken is mended, whatever needs fixing is fixed, whatever is out of alignment becomes aligned. That's what love has done, is doing, and will do continually every day in every moment of every day. For this we say thank you, and we say together, and so it is.
And so it is. And so we would like to
share the screen.
Mm-hmm. And so this is our opportunity to invest in this teaching, invest in this organization, the Center for Spiritual Living of Palm Beaches, because we are a not-for-profit corporation. We have expenses. We just had a $200 um, withdrawal from our bank account for our website organizer. And so it requires support. And the good news is that when you give, you do receive. It is an opening of your own uh, circulation, participating in the law of circulation. You cannot receive more unless you give more. And so we invite you to share your good with us. And we say this phrase because it is an investment in your own prosperity. So let's say together, my investment today is made with a full realization that God is the source of my supply and returns it to me enriched and multiplied. And so it is.
Okay, we're going to end the recording.
The square box.
Yep.